Hello and welcome to another episode of Trailblazers. It's been 40 years or more than 40 years since Shyam Benegal has been making movies. I wanted to interview him in his home where his family would be speaking with us, but Mr. Benegal was insistent that he did not want to bring the private into the public. So we are here in his office today in Mumbai, and we're going to restrict our interaction with him only to his office. So I'm going to take you into his office room. A father, a husband, a teacher, a copywriter, and he also has the bad habit of winning awards for almost all his films. But did you know that he's also a painter? I wanted to ask you about your involvement with painting first.
Oh, that isn't serious really, because I used to doodle a lot earlier on, and that's when I did some painting, particularly when I was in advertising. And in fact, I participated, when I was in advertising, I was working for an agency called Lintas.
Yeah.
And in Lintas, they used to have annually an art exhibition, and everybody used to contribute, whoever painted, either professionally or as amateurs. So I took part in a couple of those. And then, of course, I was interested in painting, but I didn't follow it up because I was not a particularly good painter. Also, I wasn't very serious about it.
But you decided that you weren't a good painter.
Yeah, I decided because, that it was just making, I was frittering away my energies and doing too many things. So when I focused on cinema, I felt that that is my main line of work. Whether it's going to be my profession, whether it's going to be my vocation, or whether it's going to be my avocation. So both ways, which actually helped because, that focused my mind. Before that, I was doing too many things, like was dabbling and, writing verse, poetry, painting on one side, doing different kinds of things. And I found that I wasn't very good at any of those. So I didn't want to be a jack of all trades. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So I concentrated my effort and energies into making films.
Filmmaking is a coming together of several arts. So was it primarily by instinct, or was it that you had to actually formally learn or consciously learn most of these art forms to bring it all together?
You see, of course, cinema makes use of a large number of different skills and arts. My choice of becoming a filmmaker, of course, came much earlier because I was fascinated by the cinema, even as a child.
I know you made a film at the age of 12 with your father's camera.
Yes,
the one,
I did.
Yeah.
But before that, you see, my father used to be, he was a professional photographer, but he also took a lot of interest in making films in 16 millimeter, and those films were usually home movies with his family. And he used to have a large collection of them, and he used to have screenings of these at family occasions, when people came for dinner and things like that, then he would show these films to his guests. So my interest in the cinema started at that time. Also because, you see, cinema is one of those things that takes you into a world outside of your own in almost a complete way, because you are taken into a world, because the manner in which you see a film, you sit in a darkened hall, there is this, moving images in front of you, you become part of that. Now, I was very fascinated by that whole experience, which is one of the reasons why my greatest sort of enjoyment and entertainment was seeing films. Even when my parents didn't want me to see too many films, because I used to run away from home to see films in local cinema
get the
hall.
money.
Yes, I didn't always need the money because I'd made friends with the projectionist in a cinema that was close to our home, and I used to go into the projectionist booth and see films.
Okay.
So it didn't cost money in that sense, except if I wanted to see it from inside the cinema, for which of course that was rationed.
Okay.
You know, naturally, because parents don't like their children to see 3 films, 4 films a week.
Yeah.
So anyway, my interest in the cinema grew, and it was helped by so many other factors as well. Because my cousin was in the films, Gurudat, was already making films. Then my eldest brother was very interested in the cinema, although he was an artist, but he took a great deal of interest in the cinema, and he used to buy every month a whole lot of professional film magazines. And many of them ended up with me, because he would send them to me. He used to live in Calcutta, but he used to post them. So I had a huge collection of books on cinema and magazines, and most of them were not kind of they were not about film stars and things like that. They were largely about films themselves, films, and then the scripts and different kinds of things like that. So that became my cinema education.
Right.
Because I'm totally self-taught. I didn't go to a film school. And when you mentioned, yes, I did make a film at the age of 12, because I wanted to try out how it would be to tell a story through the film. So it went on like that, and that interest continued until today.
You just said that you were self-taught. So my question to you is, these institutes where you learn filmmaking, coming from a person who's never been taught it formally, how do you think they have helped or not helped?
Well, you see, I wish I had, in fact, there was no film institute when I was growing up. There was no film institute like the FTII. And because of that, one was left to teach oneself how to make films. If there was a film institution at that time, I would have preferred to go there. Because you see, when you are self-taught, what happens is, there are lots of things, because you have to learn so many different kinds of things. There's no order, there's no method. And so you waste a lot of time also, before you discard things that you don't need. When you go into a formal institution, you learn, there is a certain method of learning. There's a certain academic pattern, and there are courses, and there is a certain manner in which you learn. So you go from A to Z, as it were. But when you're self-taught, you can start anywhere, and therefore it takes much longer. It's not shorter. So being self-taught was both an advantage and a disadvantage.
So what were the advantages?
Advantages were because, I had to learn a lot of things. In other words, I had to reinvent the wheel for myself. Now, that was the disadvantage in terms of time. But it was an advantage in the sense that I was not learning by rote. Somebody else is learning, I'm simply applying. That's not what I was doing. So clearly there was an advantage to the way I was learning. So today when I think which is the better way, I would always say that each to his own.
You joined Lintas, like you said, as a copywriter, and along with that you were going into your filmmaking. You got funding for the first or the second documentary that you made.
You see, when I was when I was in advertising, I was in Lintas in the beginning. After 3.5 years, I joined another agency called ASP. At that time, I applied for the Homi Bhabha Fellowship. You see, Homi Bhabha Fellowship, which is one of the Tata scholarships and fellowships that is offered. Now, the Homi Bhabha Fellowship can be for the arts and sciences. So I wanted to take one on cinema, and they offered it to me. And so I did that for 2 years, which gave me a lot of experience. You see, because when you're working in a job and you're in advertising, you don't get enough time to yourself.
Yes.
You're concerned with the work in the office and so on.
And your
So this
deadlines,
gave me 2 years. 2 years where I could function entirely on my own. And the fellowship, the conditions of the fellowship were fairly easy. And then, of course, I did half that fellowship in India and half the fellowship outside of India, where I went to Japan, I went to Britain, I went to the United States.
Yes.
Then I worked on projects, and particularly some very well-known television series, particularly related to television and children's television.
Yes.
Because that's something that I was particularly interested in. And by doing that, it also gave me a lot of experience, a first-hand experience of not only doing television, but also doing film.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came back, for the rest of the time of my fellowship, I did a series of little snippets for television.
Okay.
Educational little modules.
Yes. Yes.
And I did that for ISRO, you know. And at that time, they were doing a lot of very interesting things. So I did a whole lot of these 29 different modules, which I created different programs with the combination of these modules for children between the ages of 5 and 10 in rural children, those who did not have any formal literacy.
Yeah.
You know, so not training through literacy. So because this is audiovisual, you can jump that literacy, learning how to read and write, and then through that going into
any
other
particular
things.
instance that you
Oh,
can
many,
remember
you see,
that you can tell our viewers?
Of course, it was wonderful because I was working at that time with a group of village actors in Chhattisgarh area, because that is the area I had chosen. And Chhattisgarh area is where Habib Tanveer came from. And Habib used to have his own drama company.
Yes.
And all of them were village actors from Chhattisgarh. So I used his actors and created these modules. You know, so many things like literacy learning, like arithmetic, like history,
Mm-hmm.
like geography, you know, all kinds of subjects,
Mm-hmm.
but done and learning through oral methods. You see, because where there is no literacy, it does not mean there is no education. That education comes through certain traditional systems. Like, say, for instance, if you look at a person, in a village person, and say he does not know how to read and write, by not knowing how to read and write does not make him uneducated. It makes him non-literate, but not uneducated, because his understanding and learning, the environment and the work skills and all these kind of things, they learn without necessarily knowing how to read and write. Now, I was using that methodology both for learning things beyond normal skills that you can learn, but even things like history, you know, mathematics, sciences, all these kind of things. So which was a very fascinating thing for me to do. And that is something that I myself learned a great deal.
Talking about cinema, your first 4 films, Ankur, Manthan, Nishan and Bhumika, these films sort of brought parallel cinema, so to say, to the fore, the term parallel cinema. According to you, what do you think is this kind of cinema, and how is it different from commercial cinema?
Well, you see, when you use the term parallel cinema, I was always against that term.
I know.
Because it doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Even now it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't define anything. It does not describe anything.
Yeah,
except to say that it's different from mainstream cinema. But it was a different kind of film entertainment that you were offering, which did not fall into the traditional form of Indian film entertainment. The traditional form of Indian film entertainment automatically meant that you told a story, but it was needed to have, songs in it and dances and so on and so forth. And whatever the kind of story, whether it was a melodrama, whether it was a comedy, whether it was a tragedy, you always had these little songs and dances in it. Now this is not really cinema in the real sense of the term. But today it has become part of the cinema. But when it started in Indian cinema, they had merely translated or transpositioned from what was theatre into film.
Right.
But film itself, because of its grammar and everything else, and the fact that it is a language on its own, was not being recognized at that time. You understand? So, cinema had its own language. So, the whole idea of alternate cinema, which people call parallel cinema, was to look at the language of the cinema and construct film narratives through the language of cinema. The vocabulary of cinema.
So, in a way, you were creating a different vocabulary?
I wasn't doing anything of the sort because it had already been done before me. There was, in India, of course, it was Satyajit Ray who had started this whole thing in the 50s.
Yes.
And there were many other Bengali filmmakers also, like Mrinal Sen and Ritik Ghatak and so on. And in the South as well, because you see, in Hindi it happened much later. Because in the South you had Adur Gopalakrishnan, Aravindan in Kerala. Now, when it came to Hindi, I was among those filmmakers who started this kind of cinema in Hindi.
Yes. So, what I was coming to was that when you were conceiving these projects, was there any conscious decision that I'm not going to do this or I'm going to do that?
It's not a conscious decision to do that. It's a conscious decision to use cinematic means to offer you a narrative, because that is it's like, when you write an essay, to make that essay of a high quality, then you must know the language, you must know your vocabulary, you must know grammar, and you must know how to express yourself with a great deal of precision.
Yes.
So even in the cinema, it's the same thing. So that is what it was. So you are trying to express yourself through cinematic means. And when I say cinematic means, I'm referring to the fact that cinema has a language of its own. It is not something that you depend on some other language and just transpose it. That's not the point. So this is the whole business. So when I call it new cinema, alternate cinema, some people call it parallel. Now this is what happens in Indian cinema, starting with mid-1950s.
Yes.
But over a period of time, now both, whether you started mainstream style of filmmaking or this way, sooner or later both were feeding from each other, taking from each other.
Would you say
feeding off each other? Yeah.
Would you say in today's times, how would you interpret today's scenario in terms of?
Because cinema has gone well beyond that stage. Because today, when you think of cinema, you also think in terms of television. So many other audio-visual media have come in, and all of them have started to affect and contribute to the creation of new cinema.
Yes.
Whether you're thinking of television or whether you're thinking even in terms of the internet and so many other ways of communicating, electronic means of communication, they all have fed the cinema and contributed to the evolution of cinema.
Yes.
So now you don't think in those terms.
Exactly. Yes.
But that was a long time ago.
So
because it's more than half a century ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
So now, like you said, even earlier, commercial cinema fed off parallel cinema, quote unquote parallel cinema, and likewise the reverse. So in today's time, today's scenario, who do you think are the promising directors?
Oh, there are wonderful directors today. You know, very very accomplished directors. I can think of many. Anurag Kashyap is one of them. Dibakar Banerjee is another. You know, and there are so many. And Vishal Bhardwaj is yet another. Now these I'm only talking to you about Hindi filmmakers, but there are filmmakers elsewhere also of the South. Some of them, of course, we know Mani Ratnam's work, and so on and so forth. Now there are filmmakers, you know, young filmmakers who are coming in and creating wonderful films.
Yeah.
You know, they are creating marvelous films, and they
And
don't
on
have to.
shoestring
Yeah,
budgets.
but they don't have to reinvent the wheel. You understand? Because the evolution of cinema today, it no longer is kind of separated from one from the other.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and so there is none of the kind of fanaticism
Yes.
of one or the other.
Yeah.
Today, you can see cinema in its entirety.
Yeah.
And all the different kinds of capabilities that cinema has and can bring to bear in its expression, you know, in creation of the narrative or whatever. So this is the thing. So today when you talk about the cinema, you also think in terms of techniques of television coming into it. You know, you don't only think, oh, there's no such thing as pure cinema.
So if you were talking about techniques of television coming in, is there any way you can sort of bring this into focus through a
See,
comparison?
like say for instance, television by and large tends to use speech, verbal elements as primary, you know, as primary elements in telling of any kind of story. When you look at the way news is, you know, news is being projected, or you look at the kind of documentaries that are made for television directly, you know, not through the cinemas. They have a certain way of telling the thing, because the way you look at television also depends, you know, that also creates its own methodology of projecting, or rather communicating.
So
Now
when you
the-
say
the-
the way of looking at television in the sense that
you see, cinema is a different thing. Cinema cuts off the rest of the world when
yes.
you're watching it, because
Right.
you see it in a cinema. But you can see it even at home. So it's a combination of many things now. It's no longer the pure way of seeing film. Now similarly, when you watch television, the environment is not blocked away from you. You are part of that environment, and it becomes part of the environment. What is being seen becomes part of the environment. So it makes for certain kinds of. So you see, what happens is when you're watching television, television becomes a presence like other people.
yes.
It's like everybody else's presence. So it is a presence.
So keeping this in mind, if you were making a program for television, as in a documentary or a feature for television, what is it that your sensibilities would want you to keep
See,
in mind?
you know, now I don't worry about how I'm going to tell a story, because I will use any of the techniques that are available to me for the most effective rendition. So it doesn't matter to me. So whether I'm going to tell a story in a particular way or some other way. Now television also takes to series or different kinds. You know, when you're doing a program or series, like say for instance, I've just now done Samvidhan,
Yes.
the story of the Indian Constitution, how the Constitution was created
Right.
for free India. Now that's in 10 hours. And those 10 hours, I have an anchor who comes, which is a very television technique.
Right.
Right. You
Right.
see, it's not cinematic technique. It's a television
Yes.
technique to have an anchor and present it to you and take you through the process, which are dramatized, some documented material, all this kind of thing. Now, you are using what is natural for television itself. Now, some of these techniques also can be used in the cinema. You know, so today they feed off each other. It's not that they're separate things, because the manner in which you're watching has also changed. Because cinema, if I can take a whole bunch of DVDs of films and see them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I will only see them in a darkened hall. You know, I can see them on my laptop, you know, on my desktop monitor, or on my television screen. I can see it any which way I want. So that itself has its impact on how films will be made.
Yeah.
You know, and how television programs will be created. So these are things, so it keeps the whole medium constantly evolving.
Talking about the films you made several of them. Which ones or which one would you say took you very long, and it was a difficult process of compiling or putting together information and research for?
Well, you see, some films require a lot of researching and all of that. That is, your pre-production work is quite an enormous one. In some cases, there's not that much pre-production work, but actual execution itself might take you fairly long. Now, these are variables. They need not be.
So, if you look back,
if I look back, I would say that most films have their share of the same kind of problems, but some of them, you know, it's television really that, for instance, Bharate Khoj. I made Bharate Khoj, which was the history of India, which was dramatized, which had had an anchor, not just one, but one oral anchor, one visual anchor, had all that kind of different kinds of techniques, mixed techniques and so on and so forth. That took me a long time, because the research and scripting itself took me close to 2.5, 3 years before we actually shot the thing. And the shooting itself took about an hour, I mean a year and a half, you see. So you have, those are the kind of things that take time. Now if you're thinking in terms of feature films, different ways, like say for instance, when I made a film called Junoon, which was, we were creating a kind of historical period and so on and so forth, I had several locations. So it took me a long time to shoot that film. You know, at different locations, moving from one place to another, recreating the period, looking at, so that nothing of any contemporary kind of architecture or anything can be seen. You know, to the extent that even when you think of the road, you cannot have a tar road. You know, things like this. So you have to be very careful what will come into the frame. So all of this kind of work, you know, some of that is purely mechanical. It doesn't, not necessarily creative, but it also means that you have to, there's a lot of work involved in it, which may not always be kind of inspired creative work, but it is mechanical work which is important. You see, so this is something that happens when you're making films. So if you ask me which was the most difficult for me to say, because most of them have their own share or difficulties, depending on the subject. Now, as I mentioned Junoon, Junoon had a certain kind of problem because it was a historical film. You know, then television itself, Bharate Khoj had immense problems, because I was taking the audience from the beginning, you know, from almost Neolithic area all the way through different historical periods of the country until the present day. Now, that required a lot of different kinds of work. The casting itself was so difficult, the writing was very difficult, all this kind of thing. So those are difficulties you expect though. You know, it's not something that you say, oh my God, how difficult this is. But when you're enjoying your work, there's no such thing as difficulty.
You've been asked this question earlier, I know, but I want you to tell our viewers about your cousin Guru Dutt and how much of an inspiration was he, and how much did you want to actually move away from his work when you were doing yours?
Well, you see, Guru Dutt was a very accomplished filmmaker, and he was a source of great inspiration to me in my own sort of wanting to be a filmmaker. He was one of the sources of great motivation for me to become a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, the kind of films he made were not the kind of films I wanted to make. Completely different. The kind of films he made were things that I used to be very critical about before I started.
For instance?
Yes, like say for instance, I always felt that some of the things that he did were probably more melodramatic or theatrical than I would have done. But there are certain films of his which I think, which I continue to believe are great classics, like Kagaz Ke Phool or Sahibi Bi Ghulam. Although he became very famous because he made Pyasa. But Pyasa had certain theatrical elements that I didn't particularly care for. But the work, the film itself, was realized in a way that audiences obviously accepted it much more than any of his other films.
Yes.
You see, so those things happen, with films and filmmakers. So I don't think, I wouldn't go by that, but I would go by the fact that his style of filmmaking was such that I didn't want to follow his style of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own ideas about how I should make my films.
But going back in time, in terms of your family association with him, any particular incidents that you would like to relate to?
Well, you see, my association with him, but my earliest association has been when he was still a dancer with Uday Shankar. That was before he became a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Uday Shankar's troupe. And Uday Shankar, as you know, had a marvelous troupe of dancers. And just about anybody in the arts was there.
Yes.
Whether it's Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar Khan,
Zora Sehgal,
Zora, then you have different kinds of people. Timir Baran, who became a very famous music director later, and so on. So Vishnu Das Shirali, who started Films Division Music, the Department of Music, started by Vishnu Das Shirali, who was the music director for for Uday Shankar. So Uday Shankar's group had a lot of very interesting people, and Guru Dutt was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when he came from there, and in the evenings he used to perform for us, dance.
Oh, okay.
My parents and family and friends, we would all sit around and he would dance because he was a wonderful dancer. And that's my first memory of Guru Dutt. When he used to, summer evenings, we're all on the terrace of our house and he's dancing to music that is being played, you see. Now, that sort of thing. But this was before he became a filmmaker. After he became a filmmaker, of course, I was already, after he'd made 3 or 4 films, I had already come to Bombay and I would meet him. Because I was staying with my aunt, that's his mother. So when I first came to Bombay, I was staying with her.
Okay.
And because of that, meeting him was it's quite normal to meet him from time to time. And then I would discuss film with him, more than anything else. Because his work was something that I used to enjoy a lot. But I knew for a fact that those were not the kind of films I wanted to make.
How are you so sure?
100%, because my sensibility was so different. He had a different kind of sensibility. Mine was.
But you were very sure even then?
Oh yes, 100%. I was never, doubt about the kind of films I wanted to make. I probably would have been, I would have been probably much more influenced by somebody like Satyajit Ray than Guru Dutt. when it came to making of films. You know, because those are the kind of films that I used to be most impressed with, like Bathar Panchali, you know, films of that nature, you know, Opur Sansar, all of that. I was most impressed with Ray more than anybody else. And
you made a documentary on him.
oh
also.
yes, I did.
Yeah.
I made a full feature-length documentary on Satyajit Ray.
Yes.
Because he was in some ways, I always saw him as some, you know, as a guide, you know, as my own guide, you know, and his understanding of cinema and the kind of stories he could tell through the cinema with things like that, I totally
So
agreed with.
did he ever discuss cinema with you?
Oh,
or,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
if so,
no, but I used to go to him like I was an acolyte, as a student of his. I would meet him whenever I went to Calcutta. I used to go and meet him, make time to go and meet him, so that we could sit down and he could chat with me, and he would invite me to come and spend the evening with him. Because you see,
any major takeaways from those meetings?
Oh, many.
Couple that you can tell our
because
audience.
you see, we much of that has come in the film that I've made on him. Much of that has come. Like, say, for instance, how do we, in terms of even mechanics, you see, or in terms of editing, in terms of shooting, in terms of creating, you know, how do you create geography of a place, which will become recognizable to an audience and not be confused. How do you do that? You know, things like that. All of these things I learned from him. You see, from Ray. Now, these are things that, if you're not a filmmaker, doesn't matter to you. But if you're going to be a filmmaker, this is very important.
That's the way you execute a
Of
project.
course, of course, that's how you learn. You know, and most of those kind of things, of course, were what I would discuss with him, so that I would be clear in my own mind as to how to do those things.
Yes,
And
you
of
would
course I was-
basically bounce off
Yes,
ideas.
and as long as he lived, I was showing every film that I made. He would be my audience before the film was released.
You worked with a lot of talented actors, many of whom were starting off their careers when you made these films. So how would you spot talent, or was it just by instinct?
Well, it's very difficult to say how do I spot talent. I don't think I have any special way of spotting talent. I think it's a coincidence partially, and partially perhaps I have some kind of way of sensing that somebody can be a good performer compared to somebody else. Now there are two, three things, but I don't have a rule or anything like that. I think it's largely instinctive. But I must tell you that I was quite lucky, because at that particular time, particularly in the early 70s
Yes.
to middle 70s, was a period when a lot of marvelous actors came into the film business in India, particularly in the cinema. You'll find that some of them are very big names.
Yes.
Amitabh Bachchan came into films at about the same time. So many people. Now, the people I'm talking about are people like, say, Nasiruddin Shah, Ohm Puri, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil.
Yes.
All of these people came into the film business at about that time.
Right.
And some of them were also, you see, the early graduates of the Film and Television Institute.
Yes.
Nasir, for instance, came directly from the Film Institute. So did Ohm Puri. So did Shabana Azmi. So it was easy in that sense when you took them.
So did you make them audition, or how would you do it?
I have never auditioned an actor.
Huh?
No.
Okay.
And when I have auditioned an actor, I have not taken him.
So why would you audition?
Yes, but I never felt the need to audition, because I could tell, like, say, for instance, I met Shabana for the first time, and I told her that she'd play the lead, in my first film. And then I also told her that she will also be in my second film. And she thought I was crazy, and so she went and told her mother that. She said, this fellow is absolutely mad. He says he'll take me in the first film, and he'll also take me in the second film. So, you know, I mean, but I was quite sure of her ability.
But it was just by instinct, or you'd seen her
you know,
work, or
no,
what?
because I saw her, and I felt that I could sense her capability, you know, and which was there, of course, as you well know. And the very first film, she acts in that film.
She gets
she
the
won
award.
the national award also.
Yeah.
And so on. So now, similarly, this happened with Nasir also. Nasir came from the institute directly, but he was recommended to me by Girish Karnad, because Girish Karnad at that time was the director of the Pune Film Institute.
I see.
And Girish himself was going to play the lead in my film, Nishant.
Okay.
And he was at that time director of FTII. And he said to me, I was looking for somebody to play that part that Nasir played. And I hadn't found such an actor. So Girish said, why don't you try this boy? He is wonderful, and he's also a bit unruly, because he went on strike, you know, he did dharna in front of his office as a student.
Okay.
Yeah, so he said, but he's a very fine actor. So I sent for him.
Okay.
From Pune, and he came, and then I took him straight off.
And many of these people you didn't really have to groom in any way, is it?
Not really, because most of them came as trained actors. There were very few of them who were not trained actors, but they were in, what's the word, they were intuitively very fine actors. So, Smita Patil, for instance.
Yeah, tell us
she was
about
not
her.
She wasn't a trained actress at all. But she had a great deal of confidence. Great deal of confidence, and she had, you see, another quality which was absolutely marvelous. That she was like plasticine in your hands, you know, like she would give herself entirely to the director to work out her part for her.
Okay.
And she trusted you implicitly. And that was it was a big responsibility for the director, because she trusted you implicitly. She, you know, whatever you told her, she would do. But, and she had the confidence.
Wasn't that the case with the other actors, or they would
No,
question?
but they came with certain ideas of their own also.
Okay,
no?
okay.
But Smita then developed that.
Right.
Once she started, then she developed that, because you know, Manthan was a very, Nishant was a first film with me. She had done a diploma film for Arun Khopkar before that. Then this was her first film. After she'd done this film, then I put her in Manthan. But by the time she came into Manthan, she was already a very accomplished artist.
Okay.
And by the time she acted with, which she got the national award for, Bhumika, she was a consummate actress.
Yeah. But that transition happened very fast, I must say.
Very fast.
Yes.
And she was an extremely capable actor, extremely capable. And
how did you get her into your film?
Well, you see, I saw her as she was a newsreader for Doordarshan Marathi News.
Yes.
That's where I saw her, and I said she's very, very photogenic. And because the camera, you know, loved her. She was very attractive presence to watch on the screen, and that was very important for an actor. Actor must have that quality, that you want to look at them. So it's not important how they look in real life, it's how they get transformed in front of the camera.
Yes.
And this was her quality. And when I saw her, that's when I said to my assistant, I had an assistant of mine, and I told him, I said, try and find where this girl lives. And so he said, but I know the family. So I said, then why don't you ask her? He asked her, and she said no, point blank. Yeah, you know, and then it was.
He asked her, will you act in Shyam Benegal's film?
Yeah, and she said no. She said, I'm not an actor, I don't want to be an actor. And then, of course, her mother persuaded her.
Oh.
Yeah.
But how did her mother come to know?
Ankur. She'd seen Ankur.
Okay.
She persuaded. She said it will be a different kind of film. Don't say no like that.
Okay.
You know, so that's how she came to be in Nishant.
Okay.
But I took her, but it's very funny because the film I was going to shoot was going to be in March, April. That was the time when her exams were due. She had to give her BA exams. But I took her to shoot the film. So she lost 6 months. And she had to give her examination later.
Okay.
Not that it was important. It was just that she had a degree to her name. Because this became her career.
Yes.
And became a very important and became a very successful career for her.
So, what about Shabana Azmi?
Well, you see, Shabana not only was she a trained actress, but she's a very confident human being. She always was.
But sir, just being confident is not enough,
No,
right?
but she was also a trained artist, and also she's very sensitive and understanding of the kind of part she has to play. And she works very hard. She's she puts in many hours to give you a performance. She thinks about it. And she works out the graph for her particular role, you know, starts to give it different shades. Now these are things that are very important for an actor. And she has this wonderful quality. So you will never get a performance
Which
from
is
her
half-baked.
which is either, you know, chalta hai performance. The performances will always be of a very high quality. Whatever film you see her in, you will find that her work will always be very good.
And how much of the role do you need to coach her in, or do you need to?
I know, you see, there's no such thing as a coaching a trained actor. It's a question of their understanding of what the role is. And Shabana has great understanding of the part. And she also discusses her role with the director threadbare. She will discuss every aspect of the role, every aspect of the character she's supposed to create.
Can you give a
Many
reference?
different kinds of things, you know, I mean, very sort of what is her background, which way is she going, what are the characteristics of her
For instance, she's
personality.
done Mandi.
Yes, so that was
so,
I took her with me to a very well-known prostitutes quarter in Hyderabad.
I see.
And took her there, and we sat and she talked to the madam of the house.
Okay.
And saw other women, dancing women, you know, the young courtesans. So she learned from all of that, because we went ourselves to.
You took her?
Of course I took her.
And how did you locate that person? Was
No.
it-
I mean, you know where the
Okay.
area is. It's not as though
Yeah.
it's secret, right? It's
Yeah.
a very well-known area. And so we went to called Mehboob Ki Mehndi, which is the area
Yes.
in Hyderabad, and then I took her there, and then she met the madam and so on and so forth. And she studied everybody. She asked many questions. So that when she actually came in front of the camera, she knew exactly what she had to do.
Right.
It was not something that she was unaware of, or this was the first time she was doing, which she'd already done her homework.
And what about somebody like Ohm Puri?
Ohm also, you see, Ohm is again a trained actor, as you know. And he also works very hard on his roles. And there is never, I mean, these are people, now you don't even say anything. Because, see, Ohm and Nasir and people like that are very, I mean, not only are they actors with great experience and great ability, they also know the entire world of theatre and cinema.
Yes. Yes.
They have acted in different places. They've acted in Europe, in America, in India, everywhere, you know. So it's not a problem with them at all.
What I was referring to was when they started out and they worked with
When
you.
they
Now,
started
of course,
out, both Nasir and Ohm were both trained actors. And both of them came from, you know, via two acting places, National School of Drama and then FTII.
Yes.
So they were doubly trained.
Hmm.
You know, they were already, the discipline of acting was very much ingrained in them.
Is there any commonality amongst all of them that you can think of?
Well, all of them, are the commonality is that they are all wonderful actors.
Yeah.
They want to give a good performance, they want to give the best they can possibly give. They don't give up halfway, which is the wonderful quality, which is why their careers have gone the way they are.
About the younger crop of actors you worked with, any particular persons that you would like to talk about?
Well, you see, they all have their wonderful qualities. I've had so many marvelous actors like Pallavi Joshi and so on. You know, some of them who have continued with their careers, some of them have not continued with their careers. So you have different kinds of people, and now, you know, in the film business, you suddenly find that a lot of wonderful people are coming in.
Yes.
You know, because it's appreciated, their work is actually appreciated for the kind of roles they play. So I don't think there's the kind of problem that used to be at that time. Because, you know, when I'm talking about, what am I talking about? I'm talking about things that happened 45, 46 years ago. I'm not talking about today. Today everything is quite different in that sense. Because, you know, you have people who come and whose understanding of all of this is much greater because of the atmosphere and the environment in which they live.
What is it that you think would have been a no-no earlier, which you had to sort of cross a barrier, which you don't have to now?
When you're a filmmaker, the kind of filmmaker I am, every film you make is your first film.
Yes.
You know, it's not easy to get
Yes.
money to make a film, particularly the kind of films I make. So it's always been a bit of a struggle to get money to make the film. So I've always considered the film I'm going to make as my first film. You know, because one doesn't think of what you have done in the past. What you have done in the past is past. It has nothing to do with now and
Was there any opposition to what you had done earlier, which
No,
is striking?
none
There was
at all,
something-
none
yeah,
at all.
yeah.
You see, the point is, when you make a film, it depends. You have a certain sensibility. That sensibility may be maybe it will have a match with the kind of audience you're looking for, or may not. There's so many aspects, you know. So you can't always think that whatever you do is going to be acceptable to the audience. Some films are more acceptable, some films are less acceptable. It also depends on the kind of subjects you make your film on. And subjects, again, you will only choose the subjects that interest you at that time.
In fact, I was coming to that point. You must be getting a lot of scripts and a lot of stories from people who want their films made or whatever.
Well, I used to at one time, not anymore, because they know that, you know, there's a certain kind of film that I make.
Yeah.
I have a certain kind of sensibility. Those people who think that their sensibility matches with mine, they will send me a script.
No,
Otherwise,
but even that meant...
yeah, but there are not too many now, as it used to be at one time.
So how would you sift through it?
Well, you have to read them and then you give your honest opinion, because I do believe that when people have done so much work, you need to look at it very carefully and pay serious attention to what they're trying to do. And if it is not something that you think is worthwhile doing, then you must explain that to them with a degree of honesty.
No, but how would you explain to yourself first that, okay, this is not going to work for me or something? It's just instinct?
Well, that's experience, no? That comes through experience. How else would that happen?
Initially, you didn't have much experience.
No, obviously
But
not at
so-
the beginning.
yeah,
And
so
then it
then-
only happens later, but at that time nobody was sending me scripts.
These were scripts that you wrote. Sort of, how did you get your initial scripts?
But initial scripts, I used to write them, no? I wrote my scripts. Then I got collaborators. When those collaborators have remained with me, like Shama Zaidi
Yeah,
continues to write, and so is Atul Tiwari. Now these two have been my long-term collaborators,
Yeah.
and much of the writing is done by them now, and also much of the researching is done by them also.
So what is a day in the life of Shyam Benegal now, or is there nothing typical to a day?
There's nothing except when, you know, I read as much as I can. I do the work that I have in my hand. I live a normal life. I mean, don't do anything special, at least not to myself, or not that I think it's special, because that's everyday work for me. Because I'm a professional filmmaker, and everything that I do relates to that professionally. Otherwise, I have friends like everybody else has friends. I have other things also that I do, which are not necessarily related to the cinema itself.
For instance?
Well, love to travel. Both my wife, my daughter and I are great travelers. Just now my wife and daughter are in Bhutan.
I see.
I'm on a holiday. But I couldn't go because I was busy with my work. But we, some of the things that we do, we enjoy doing together is to travel.
So do you think much of the allied interests that you have also sort of, you've stumbled upon it or consciously acquired a taste for along with your filmmaking or something?
It's combination, no? Everything is a combination of that which you have designed for yourself and that which falls in your lap. So, it's not as though everything you designed for yourself. Certain things happen through chance, coincidence and so on and so forth. But your own sensibility and interests determine in what direction you will take those with you. So basically that's what it is.
So what is the direction that Shyam Benegal is taking now?
Well, my dear, I'm waiting to make my next film, which I will be doing soon.
Okay.
Not film really, it's a kind of history program. And then after that I have a script for a film. So that's what I will be doing. Because, I mustn't forget that I'm not a spring chicken anymore. There's only a certain limit, there's a limit to how much I can do what I'm doing.
What happened to Chamki Chameli?
Well, we're working on it. We have a couple of scripts. Let's see. At the moment, I'm thinking of something else.
Okay.
But that script is there.
Okay.
As and when I can get people interested in putting money into it, then I will do it.
So, Mr. Benegal, thanks very much for taking time out.
Thank you.
And all the best.
Thank you.